Hello, everyone, and welcome back to I Love Beauty with Trashellie. I'm Ashley,
And I'm Elle.
and we welcome you all, whether or not you're listening here live with us here in our Discord server, whether you're over on YouTube, or if you're not listening to us over on Spotify. Last week, we got to have a really long discussion about everyone's favorite antagonist, Yui Hirahara. And I feel like we've got a really interesting segue into tonight's topic. Last night's new episode gave us a lot of really good information, or a lot of really good nuggets of information on Rand and Nessa's relationship. And we're really, really eager to talk about them tonight.
If you're reading I Love You and the recent chapter left you blue, or feeling like it's too good to be true, we get together and share our theory, bend down and praise the almighty Quimchi. Come join us for tea with Trashellie.
How do you want to start this, Elle? Should we start with kind of like what we kind of thought about the relationship before that episode? Like how we kind of saw them up until this time?
Sure.
All right. So, getting into kind of what we always thought about Rand and Nessa's relationship up before this episode, like how we kind of envisioned what we thought about what we kind of expected had been like how they came to be before like this informed us of anything. Which is kind of like I think Elle and I had very similar ideas about this, where there had always been that sense that Rand and Nessa kind of had that the one that got away feeling of their relationship, and that Rand was a person who was busy chasing his big dreams, the prestige and money. He was very clearly career focused. Perhaps even he thought that he could live without love. I think we kind of saw a parallel of this where Noel has been trying to push Shanae away, kind of convince himself that he can live without this as well. And that feeling that maybe they reconnected later in life and found that those feelings never really went away. And that even though Rand had gotten married, had a whole family, a whole life, they kind of acted on those lingering feelings. And we got Noel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels very much like Nessa and Rand and Nessa's relationship is like a remnant of the past version of Rand and the past life that he led, where especially from the idea that they probably met each other before he had really become the man that we know, before he met Yui, before he had sold his company. And it was they rekindled later, and that Nessa really knew that old version of him. He was really in that old version of himself with her.
Right. She was able to see that even after he had changed, after he had locked a lot of himself away. I think she was still able to, whether or not she could still see it, or it was because she knew that he existed once and she could still reach for him. I think that was probably a really big element for them, is that whole, I know who you used to be, I know what kind of person you always were back then, and I hope that I can pull that person back out of you.
Yes.
And I will admit that when it comes to Nessa, I've fully given the benefit of the doubt, where I don't want to idealize her too much. So in my mind, I had always wondered if it was very likely that she knew that, Rand is a married man. He has this whole other life. He has, this business arrangement, basically. And that because it was a business arrangement, because it wasn't a marriage for love, she was okay with what they did. In my mind, it was very much an active affair.
Mm-hmm.
It was something where for them, it was both something that was very passionate compared to, Rand's very loveless marriage that was very much like this cold, empty prison. And, like, if Rand had confided anything in her about, what it's like, what his relationship is really like, Nessa wanting to, be that person who can be there for him. I feel like that was probably, in my mind, it was something that like she had justified, because it was like, that relationship doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything to him. So this is okay because what we have is real, I think I saw somebody say this in the FastPass channel about how, what did they say? I think it was something like, when it's written well, they don't mind cheating in fiction. And I'm kind of the same, because that's where you get your really good story. I was very okay with the idea of Nessa being this person who was like, I know that Rand is married, but I also know this version of him that nobody else knows. Like, that mentality that he may be, Yui's husband, but he'll always be my Rand,
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, in my mind, I'd always assumed that this was the case.
Sorry, I'm still fiddling with backup slightly, but I think I got everything settled. But yeah, and ultimately it's like we don't actually even at this point know for a fact that there wasn't that element, but we do know that she wasn't like okay with it, like as okay with it as we would have thought.
Right. Not like, at least in that beginning. Like,
Yeah.
we still don't fully know what happens after this point. Like, how do we go from, Nessa calling Rand, like, she literally called him scum. Like, everything about that final meeting for them feels like it's a parting of the ways for them. Like, it's like saying, like, we did this and it was a mistake and I'm sorry, but I have to go back to my real family, and so we don't know how we go from this point where she is not okay with being the other person. She is not okay with what appears, like, she perceives it being deception, that, whether or not it was that he didn't tell her about his relationship, he didn't tell her, like, when they met and they rekindled, did he conveniently leave things out? You know? Um, so how do they go from this point where she's really hurt and she's really angry to she is living in that same country, like there's still a lot of that we don't know, but we do know that at the very least at that point, when Null was actually conceived, it was not that she intentionally knew that she was engaging in an affair with a married man. It wasn't that she justified being with him. She was genuinely hurt to find out that, you know, that's what the case really was.
And um Rand says in the episode that, well, like she says that he came back and deceived her, and he says that he wasn't lying at the time. And so I think it opens up an equal possibility of either not knowing when they met up or having a false sense of hope.
Mm-hmm. Like whether or not he and Yui were going through a rough patch where it felt like, okay, maybe this is going to end. Maybe we are headed for a divorce and I'm going to be free and I can actually come back and we can actually rekindle this.
Yeah, we're like, it was that, like, it started out where, she has to be the other woman for a little while. He has to figure things out, but it's going to work out. It's going to be okay. They're going to be able to be together and build a life together. And then when push comes to shove and the time comes to make that kind of final decision of like, are we doing this? Are we able to do this? Can I have you? Can you build a life with me? And he chose no. And isolated her essentially and cast her out in that way, even though obviously both of them still had so much love for each other, which is why it hurt so much, where, she it was that, like, there was that hope, whether or not it was because she didn't know or because she thought it was going to end, there was that hope that they were going to be together. And then with what we just saw, it all got shattered in that decision, basically.
And, this is something that does come up a lot when we talk about infidel and stuff. Like, obviously, a lot of the time people want to blame the other person, but there are a lot of cases where it is very much something like that, where it is, this person who is in a relationship and they're stepping out and they're telling this, this other person, their side piece, that, it's like, hey, I'm going to leave them. This is what's going on. I promise you, I'm going to leave them. And then what happens when it doesn't pan out, And and there, you can make whatever moral objections to this that you want, that like, well, you still shouldn't be engaging with, somebody who's in a relationship, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But the point is that person is still, building that hope in someone, and it does feel like that is very much a possibility that Rand could have been doing, and not one where he was doing it with that intention to hurt, because like you said, he probably genuinely saw an opportunity and thought that maybe this is going to be that chance for freedom, and it did not end up panning out that way.
And
Go ahead.
He said it himself to her, where he said that he wasn't deceiving her at the time, he wasn't lying at the time, but he was caught up in his emotions, where like whether or not he thought that it was actually realistically possible, that he did think that he was going to build that life with her, and he, when he was with her, felt that that was his future.
Right. And like, as much as we've been talking a lot about like how much Rand deserves a lot of this, to some degree you have to sympathize with that a little bit, I think, just because it's made abundantly clear that Nessa is somebody who is very important to him, that even after he has made his choices, after he has left, after he's tried to put all of this behind him, that however they met up again, whether or not it was that he was under the illusion that maybe he was going to separate from his wife, whether or not it was that he thought that he had that chance, like you said, blinded by his emotions, so caught up in it, because it turns out that she is like that person he cares so much about, that like nothing else in his life really compares. Except on the other hand, he makes that comment about how like he's built up too much, like there's too much that he can lose. He has to go back, the business, his son, you know, like those takes about everything that he built up in lieu of her, I guess, things that he chose instead of her. And how, like, even though we can sympathize with him wanting this thing that he gave up, regretting what he gave up, we also, like, completely understand why Nessa is so hurt and angry, and why, even if in Rand's mind he was being completely honest, he wasn't lying at the time, it was true at the time. The point is, it still wasn't, honest. Like, if you aren't coming out and being explicit about what the relationship really is, like, it's still deception, right?
Yeah, and that, like, and all of that, I think, ties so strongly into, like, what their history was before this moment, where, and, like, something that came up in the immediate discussions about this episode afterwards was that, like, when looking at Rand, we have to look at his ambition, and we have to look at both where it came from and how it was interacting with the world around him. Where, like, Rand, and we said this before in Rand the Damned, but Rand was, born an orphan. He was born, like, he was a rags to riches story, coming from extreme poverty with no one, nothing and nobody. And he built his way up, and he had to find a place for himself in the world. He had to inject himself into the social order, the social hierarchy, because he had nothing to his name. He had no family. He had no love. He had no security, and he growing up and he aged out of the system.
Right.
No one was we can assume that no one was ever there for him, basically. So he never had any experience with being loved and emotional security and emotional connection. And when you're also struggling so much physically, where he had nothing, probably could didn't feel any sense of physical security, like that takes precedence, because in order to be emotionally secure, you have to also be physically secure, to at least a certain degree. And if he didn't have that, he's going to try to build that first. And with no experience with emotional security, it makes complete sense that he prioritized that,
Right.
and that he went down that route.
Especially when you age out of the system, because at that point, you're young and naive enough to believe that I've spent 18 years without this. I don't need it. It's like there are more important things for me. There are other ways for me to build myself up and make myself into a somebody. And that, right, like you said, that financial security takes that precedence, because we live in a material world. That is how you become a somebody, is you have to have assets, you have to have that prestige, you have to have something that's worth talking about. And that's what he went for.
And so he was chasing it for what it seems to be basically his entire life. And meeting Nessa was likely a wrench in that, right? Like it doesn't seem like he wanted to have a relationship with somebody. He wasn't looking for that kind of security and connection, but he found it in her. But he still had such a drive and a need for that physical security that he thought that it was more important than her. Very much likely, like his son, thought, this is fleeting, this is passing. He never had an enduring emotional connections. So likely the only kind of long-standing thing built that he had experience with was seeing these this physical security, these kind of money tycoons, these people with high status, where that endures, right? But this emotional connection, this love, that's probably fleeting. And if he were to stop and were to put his stock in this, how likely is it that it's not going to be what he needs in the long run? So he left her, and like you said, he built this whole other life without her.
Right. I feel like, even though I fully acknowledge that Rand is a very damned man who is very trapped in a prison that is only partially of his own making, the point is that it is still partially of his own making. He made those choices, when he entered a relationship, and by relationship, I mean, I assume marriage, because I don't think, Yui and Rand did a whole courtship thing. But, when he made that agreement to marry into this family, to enter this Nukoyoshi agreement, to become a part of this Hirahara family, he knew what he was giving up. If you are agreeing to marry this heiress to this, very well-known corporation, you have to know that you're throwing away everything that came before this. And maybe at this point, it was one of those things where, he had removed himself enough that he thought, that's fine. This is okay. This is, he weighed the pros and cons, and in his mind, everything that he gained from this relationship, was so much greater than what he was leaving behind. Like you said, I think it's very much one of those things where he felt like it was something that was so fleeting, and maybe in that kind of out of sight, out of mind thing. He's so busy chasing his ambitions, achieving his dreams. He was so wildly successful at such a young age. You know, like he probably didn't feel the absence of her until he entered into this very loveless relationship. Um, I know we've talked a lot about whether or not Rand saw opportunity in this marriage to, like kind of enter this ready-made family where he is finally adopted into a family, that very thing that never happened to him when he was young enough to become a part of a family where, like I don't think Rand is an idealist man. I think we have seen that in him. But, maybe, what if there was like this very quiet idealist part of him that thought, maybe something good will come of this.
And
And go ahead.
I was gonna say, and like it really is so poetic with him being a Mukuyoshi, where, like you said, like he didn't just marry into the family; he was adopted in, and he was a child who aged out of the system without being adopted. So it's like, even if only in name, like even if he, knew that the Hiroharas were going to be kind of a cold family, weren't really going to be that loving family, but even in name, he could finally have a family, and like you said, he could finally be adopted, that thing that never happened to him.
Mm-hmm. And right, I feel like he probably did not feel the ramifications of what he lost until he found himself face to face with her again. I mean, I think he probably began to feel it like as he began to find out who Yui really was, because I'm sure she probably began to reveal a lot of that shortly after, kind of like, now that you're trapped, I get to reveal who I really am. And guess what? You just signed a deal with the devil, and it's too late to do anything about it. Um, Especially, once Kousuke came into the world and every attempt that he has made at parenting, we've seen that she has, undermined. She has clearly tried to get in the way of things, to orchestrate things so that he had very little involvement in that relationship. And maybe that is when Rand started to feel the regrets. And, once he came face to face with Nessa again, and like we still don't know how they wound up back in the same place. Was, did he go there with the intentions to seek her out? And if he did, what was the line of thinking there? Was it like, hey, Yui and I are in this rough place. It feels like maybe we are heading to a divorce. Is this my time to, like go make up for my mistakes? Was it something more fortuitous where, here's a business trip that leads me back into this old neck of the woods, and I'm just gonna swing by for old time's sake, and conveniently he isn't wearing his ring, like somebody pointed out. Whether or not it's that both of them stopped wearing their ring after their separation, whether or not it was that he, approached Nessa without it, back to that whole point of deception. The point is, at some point in time, he did realize that, what he had weighed out, these pros and cons, did not equate the way that he had thought that they were going to.
Mm-hmm. And like, so much of the impact of that scene is that like concept of like, Rand made his choice once and he left and he said, I don't need this, I don't need you, essentially. And then, he built himself up, he got like she said, he got everything that he wanted, and then he came back and he was with her again, and in one way or another led her to believe that he might be choosing her and that, she could have him, and then he went and made the same choice again and left her again. And like you said, like originally, and I think especially based on how Nessa was living in Korea and the flashbacks that we had of her from Nolan Kousuke, where, she is very much making do with the situation. She is kind of like trailing in the shadows behind Rand and like doesn't show that upset with their situation, even though like logically that it had to have not been ideal, like she had to have wanted something different, but may like have overall been okay with it. That in this flashback we get such a different perspective where she is so angry at him and is calling him out for all the hurt that he's led her to in the deception, and is mad that she isn't enough for him, and mad that he still wants those other things and wants them at the expense of her being second and not being able to build a life with her.
Right. It's like, like everybody has waited for so long for this random Nessa flashback. And the first one that we're given is one that is laced with so much pain and hurt. And like, I think we can go ahead and say resentment, because like there's clearly so much resentment, because like you said, it's not just that like he has done this to her twice now, but like it's what it costs her as well. Like
Yeah.
they're not coming out and talking about it, but like we are able to deduce that it sounds like Nessa has gone through with an abortion. And it sounds like it was at the encouragement of Rand, whether or not she wanted to do it, or if it was more like, this is the only option because you're not going to be here to help me raise him. You're not going to be here to help me support him because you already have another family, because you already have another son that you're going to go raise. So the one that I have, that we've created, isn't allowed to exist. And
And, like,
there's so much pain there,
and even more so, like, especially knowing what we know about the threat that Noel poses to Yui, and the fact that Rand
Mhm.
is supposed to be aligned with Yui, and he is supposed to be building up their lineage together, that, like, not only is it that her son isn't allowed to exist because he already has another and he can't raise with her, that her son is a threat to the life that he's built.
Right,
And she is a threat to the life that he's built, and she has to be cast out because he is choosing against her.
right. And, also, like, when we think about the Mukoyoshi theory, the fact that it means any of Rand's lineage are the hair, which means that, that second born, that spare, he is a threat just simply for existing. The fact that, he has to be erased from existence just because it's a threat to Kousuke's existence. And how unfair that is to Nessa, because like one of the things that we can look at about I Love You is the fact that Noel and Nessa could have lived a completely separate life, unconnected to any of this. Like if they'd never come to the United States of Asia, Korea, like they never would have been that threat to Kousuke. Kousuke could always have been the heir to the Hirahara fortune that he was always meant to be. And that Noel and Nessa could have had their life together. And it just there's so much tragedy interwoven into it. And the fact that there's just something really extra heartbreaking about the fact that it's not only that Rand has asked her to, go through with something that's so harrowing, that, like I'm a very, very pro-abortion person, very pro-choice, but the point is that it all comes down to the choice. And it's like, did she want that? Or was it the choice that she felt like this is the only option that we have? He knows that she's been kicked out of her home by her mother, that it was so dire that her mother involved the police, and he's leaving to go back to his other family, and he's just leaving her all alone with nobody. And like even if going having an abortion was her choice, that doesn't mean like it's an easy thing, like it's not something that everyone can just like bounce back from. Who was there to sit with her, when her heart was breaking?
And it's just that,
Not him.
like, yeah, like you said, like, not him, like, she and, like, I also think that it seems like she didn't really want to have the abortion, but that she was doing it or saying that she was doing it because it's unclear whether she lied or it failed. Um,
Mhm.
but was, saying that she was going to go through with it because it was better for him, because it's what he wanted, because he decided that he wasn't going to be present in a family with her. And like that's the finality of that choice, right? The conception of Null represented that it was that they could build something, and Rand very consciously went, no, we cannot. And that's what hurt so much. But like, whether or not she was actually okay with that choice, she was alone regardless. Like you said, her mother kicked her out. It got so bad that the police were involved and she was told never to come back. The man that she loves that led her into this situation, that it was the other half of why this was happening, is going back to his, business wife and business kid and corporation that he's the heir to the fortune of, and this whole life that he built without her. And she is still going to be alone at the end of the day. She was alone through it. She was made her choices, like, and had to see them through alone. And after the end of this, she is going to be alone again with nowhere to go.
And all he can do to offer her is, here's some money, because that's the only kind of security that he understands, because he doesn't have that concept of the emotional security that she is lacking. Because even though her relationship has severed with her mother, even if maybe they had a far more rocky relationship than we knew before this, because for all we know, maybe they did butt heads a lot, maybe this was the final straw. The point is, she knows the weight of what she has lost, and the fact that it's all been at the expense of her. That, like you said, he has gained so much and she has lost everything. And like, she loses her mother, and obviously, that's a whole other thing. Like, Nana is very responsible for her own judgment and choices as well. But the point is, the only thing that he can do to offer her is say, hey, I can provide you a home. I can give you some money. And like, he offers her like a few months worth of rent of like money. And it's like, that's the best you can do. Like, here's somebody who is alone with her grief, like, not over just the child she's lost, but the relationship she's lost, the mother she has lost, the, just the entire life that she's lost, how alone it leaves her. It's just, like, I remember, because this is when Kimchi did her live stream, she was coloring some of these panels. And she never shows the text when she colors these, but we could see that it was some kind of argument, and that Rand has kind of like that resolute, I can't argue with whatever you're saying to me kind of thing. But to see the actual words of what it is that he, all he can do is say, I'm sorry for knocking you up and then making you go through an abortion, thinking that maybe we can have a life together, except sight, we can't. I've got to go back to my she-devil wife and go back to my life of luxury and money, and you get to go to who knows where because you don't even have a home now. It's so tragic.
And it's just like, and even in that like argument, she's still fighting for it, like she is still expressing that she wants that life. And she, like, as much as she's angry with him because she wants that, and he just is still shutting her down with the like, you know that I have to go back, you know what I have to do, and like, here's the money. And like, like you said, like, it's literally the only thing that he can think to do at that point, because we see this recurring theme throughout his character, even up to the present day with his current children, and the way that he treats them and how he tries to provide and comfort them, that like, he just has that priority on that physical security, and is kind of in the mindset of like, things might suck, but as long as you're like financially taken care of, it's not that bad, because I mean, that's what was the big bad of his life originally. But it's just, it's such a cold way to leave things, and such a cold way to leave her. And like, knowing that not only was this interaction so like tragic and heartbreaking, but like you said, she has lost everything, and he will have a home to go to, and she will not.
Right. And like there's definitely an argument to be made about how like obviously the home that Rand is going back to is not so much a home but a prison, like that cold empty cell. But the point still remains that he made that choice. He chose that life. He had the opportunities. He had two, at the very least, opportunities to choose Nessa, and he still chose his ambitions. And in the end, she's the one who has to deal with the ramifications of it. Like, I mean, yes, Rand deals with the ramifications in a completely different way because we fully acknowledge that Yui is an abusive partner. But the point still remains: which one of them is alive right now?
Yeah. Like
um
she did truly lose everything for being involved with him.
Man, it ain't shit. um but it's just it's tragic. Like, they are a truly truly tragic story. um because something that we see from that is how Nessa, she clearly resents what he had and what he chose and what she can't have with him, because she clearly wanted some kind of life with him. Like, that's why she is so bitter and so hurt, that he got everything he ever wanted at the expense of her. That he has the business to go back to, his new, younger, beautiful wife, but he's also got that child to go back to. And the fact that Kosuke's existence means that her child couldn't exist. And how that must be some kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say pain point, even though like that's what we're calling it. But like, that it's the fact that like, for Kosuke, Nessa was always like that figure who destroyed his picturesque family, right? Like, she was the reason that everything fell apart. And likewise for Nessa, it's a very similar thing where like, if it wasn't for Kosuke, could Rand have maybe given up some of those things? Could he have, you know, could he have set aside that ambition and allowed himself to give up all of his achievements if it meant that kind of freedom and being able to go back? I've talked a lot about how I feel like Kosuke is one of those reasons that Rand remained in his very awful marriage to Yui. And I feel like this episode kind of further confirms that for us, that, he felt that obligation and duty to take care of his son and to be there, even if Yui was constantly undermining him and, orchestrating things so that Rand couldn't always be there for him the way that he wanted to. He still was trying to make that effort because, like, he's unfortunately a man of his word, and he, had to stick to it. So, like, in that same way that for Kosuke, Nessa is the very undoing of everything that, he believed in. Like, Kosuke's existence is so much that same for Nessa, where it's like, maybe if not for him, could she have had what she wanted?
Yeah, and it's just that like seeing the reflection in both Nessa and Kosuke about how much the other represents this idea of their lost family and the lost love of Rand and why they can't have it. It's just like that got to me so much, where it's like
Mhm.
you said, like Kosuke remembers Nessa as like this monster, he scribbles her out. She is the thing that came in and destroyed his picturesque family. She is the thing that set it all off. The other woman, the person who his father loved in a way that he never saw his father love, his own mother or himself.
His too
And
busy father, who had no time for them but had time enough to go start a whole other family.
yes. And like on the flip side, Nessa is very much having that same experience where like, you know, like when he brings up Kousuke is the moment where she snaps and the moment where she turns around and basically tells him to get lost and starts screaming at him because she is so in love with him. He has loved her, has used her in her feeling right now because he left and he came back and he had his way with her and he chose against her again because he already has a child with another woman and he has to go back to them and she's going to be left alone and their child can't exist because this other child does, where their family can't exist because he already has this kid with somebody else. And like that idea that he can't have a child with her but he can have a child with his business wife. It's okay there, but it's not okay that she got pregnant. It's not okay for them to be a family and for her to have a child. And he can't support her because he already has this other kid, where it's like, to both of them, the existence of the other is what destroyed that potential family and the thing that was taking up all of Rand's love so that they couldn't have it. When in reality, Rand didn't have the ability at that point to distribute the love that he had for all of them appropriately and be with all of them and make choices that were okay for anyone because he had already gone down this path. And
test of your reflexes.
Oh my gosh.
It's that Nitro will play a sound effect when people enter.
Oh my gosh. Oh no. Welcome, Bombi. Oh gosh. Wait,
crying and then Bombi just
we love her. It's okay, she's allowed. She was an integral part of this pod being created.
just us over here like, kind of crying and then Bombi. Okay. Back to the crying.
I was talking about like the kind of mirroring between Kousuke and Nessa in like their emotions and that feeling of like Rand's love was not enough to go around kind of, and the existence of this other thing was taking his attention and showing a form of love to them that the other couldn't have, and that soreness and like ultimately resentment of that, where like you have to give up your family and like your ability to be a family because this man who is too busy for you, has too many other obligations for you, is able to be there for somebody else. And like this is also reflected between Kousuke and Noel, where like this is projected onto Noel, but also like Noel is the outcast and the black sheep, while Kousuke gets to be the heir and daddy's golden son, where like they both also feel very much this sentiment that there is somebody else that Rand is prioritizing and that they get to be a family, but you yourself don't because of that. And like the way that I put it, that like these echoed sentiments between them, is that idea of like, why can you not be a family with me, but you can be a family with them? And that like, why do I always come second? Why is it different with them? Why are you choosing them? Why do you need them more? And like, why am I not enough? Which is very much something that like all of these people who have tried to love Rand and who Rand did love and was unable to be with effectively seem to have, like, these are sentiments that seem to be mirrored among them all based on the way that Rand was not able to be a family with any of them.
And I think it really ties back to what we were saying about Rand's foundations and how like he does not grasp that emotional security. It is not something that he, like, I don't want to say it's something that he doesn't comprehend. I think it's something that at these points in life he did not really realize is as necessary. For Rand, he's trying to provide for people the best that he can, but what all of these people needed was no more than simply being provided for. Like, obviously we know with Kousuke, Yui ran a lot of interference, which is part of this issue. But Yui and not Yui, Nessa and Kousuke both have that feeling of why am I not enough? Because Rand's love never reaches them. For Nessa's case, it's because she doesn't want to have to share him. Why can't she have all of him?
Why does she have to hide?
Right. For Kousuke, it's that, Yui commodified Rand's love. So even when Rand is extending his love and affection to Kousuke, it will never reach him because of the way that Kousuke has come to, see love and affection. Like the fact that he grows up being told that we're not like other families. So he's never going to interpret love and affection that way. But also because of how she's commodified Rand's love as being something that he must earn, that, there are certain milestones he must hit before Rand is ever going to love him, is ever going to, see him as an equal. Like, he can't even fathom that Rand is offering him his love because he hasn't hit those milestones yet. So how can he be? So, like you said, Rand doesn't have enough love to pass around, but it's also that even as he's trying, it doesn't reach them. We also know even for Noel, he's trying to show his love in the only way that he is allowed, that is safe for him to show Noel. And obviously, Noel doesn't understand this because everything that Rand says, sounds like a disparaging of his existence. And we've talked so much about how everything Rand says is very like it means two things at once, and the unfortunate understanding that he has always meant even the negative things as well as those positive things. And so yeah, I think a big folly is the fact that Rand can't even offer the emotional security because it was something that I think until very recently, he never even could fathom that people really couldn't provide for them because it wasn't something that he had allowed himself to have. So how can he understand what they need if he himself isn't, indulging in it? So that whole concept of why am I not enough is because nothing that he can do for them was ever going to be enough. Nessa didn't want to share him. She didn't want to be another woman. She didn't want to be a secret lover. She didn't want to be in the shadows. It was like if she was going to have him, why couldn't she have all of him? And likewise with Kousuke, why was he as a child not enough for his father? And again, we know with Kousuke that this is, very much an interference. And that's not entirely Rand's fault, but the point still remains that that mirroring of both of them and how we've known for so long that Nessa is like this big cataclysm for Kousuke, but to see that it was reflected the same for Nessa, that his mere existence destroyed everything for her is so tragic.
And through what we've seen of Nessa so far and the way that Rand has mentioned her explicitly or implicitly, the way that Kousuke has remembered her, the way that Noel has remembered her, it very much gave the impression, and I do ultimately still think this is true, that Nessa was the only one who ever actually experienced Rand's love in a way that was I guess that was able to be held, and she got the most of it out of anyone. She knew Rand the most out of them all, and still it wasn't enough. It still left her so alone and so far behind, and so shamed, as she, like you said, is the other woman, and she can't have all of him, and he is going off to be with his other family. And I'm seeing in the chat this the parallels to Shanae with the "if you won't let me have you," with that same way that Shanae wants all of Noel and gets jealous of Alyssa, even though Noel told her flat out that he does not like Alyssa. He does not want to be with her. That he doesn't find those things that are like viewed as like appealing traits for Alyssa in the public. That he is not drawn to them, and that, well, he hasn't said this to her, but it's, you know, it's clear to all of us that he loves Shanae for all of the reasons that are uniquely hers, and in so many ways all the things that he isn't shown in Alyssa, that like Rand likely felt the same way about Nessa, where like he loved Nessa for all of the things that Yui wasn't, and all the things that were uniquely Nessa, and you know, she received more of Rand's love than anyone else. But again, there's still that like it wasn't enough, and at the end of the day, Nessa was still left alone and ashamed and with so much loss.
I think we could argue that is, you know, that makes it like worst. Like, I mean, like, again, like it really depends on how we're going to argue this, because, you know, like his children deserve so much more than they got. But like you said, like Nessa is somebody who knew all of Rand. She knew who he was before he had made it. She knew who he was before he was this big hotshot. She knew who he was once he had repressed all of that deep down inside of him. And the fact that, like you said, I think it was once he was in that relationship with Yui, once he was trapped in this relationship, that it turned out didn't give him any satisfaction, didn't provide him any of that emotional security, because it turns out that yes, what he did need was in fact emotional security, that he realized what he had really lost, what he had really given up for this choice. And I think, yeah, we can argue that for Nessa, it is particularly awful just because of how much of him she knew and she loved, and how very little she was able to actually receive in the end. Like, obviously, we know that Rand loved her so greatly. Like, you know, so much of this story exists because of that. But it's the fact that that love couldn't reach her. It's the fact that Rand was a man who apparently has never really been able to, you know, like share his love with people that way. Like, we know that she knew a version of Rand who at one point was warm and funny and goofy. And, you know, it's just like, with that must have been like the last time that he was ever that authentic version of himself. And the, you know, like, even when we think about like once she came, you know, to the country, he, you know, she was still living in the shadow. It's not like his love was able to reach her once she was there. If anything, it was worse, because she's so close and she still can't reach out and touch him. They still cannot connect, even though they're right there, right in his shadow. And that's the thing, is like, love could not be enough for them. And that's so painful for her. But yeah, it's just ultimately that echoed sentiment of like, why was I never enough? And how for a man who does not show a lot of love or affection, Rand has a lot of people who are demanding his love.
And that's like they all needed it, and no one actually got it. And I know Rumiarla just said in the chat all the times that she waited for him and he never came. And it's just like, this episode was so destructive. It's
Painful, so painful. Like, I can't remember if we actually put this in our outline. I don't think we did, so I'll go ahead and mention it here. How, like we said, we still don't know what changes after this point, to the point that, you know, they're naming Noel together, to the point that she's in the same country as him. How, you know, was it that Yui got involved and, you know, portrayed Rand and lured her to the country? Because that, you know, that theory alone is so terrible to me, because for this, you know, for Rand to have jerked her around so many times, and for, you know, this final time, this whole, you know, whatever needed to be said to lure her to the country, whether it's like those false promises, we're separating, I promise this time we're going to, like be a family, except it's not coming from him this time, and for all of it to have been like deception again, not his deception, but, just the point that yet again she was deceived and yet again it has destroyed everything. I know Vami also brought up the idea that maybe at some point in time, as Noel had gotten older, Nessa had wanted the brothers to be close so that they could at least have each other. That way, even if she and Rand could not have a relationship, if she had accepted that part, the idea of them at least being able to have a relationship together is a really interesting one that I really like, because it would explain how Noel and Kousuke were able to meet so many times before, they actually were meant to act as a family, how Noel was always meeting Kousuke on his birthday. But there's just something so painful thinking about her being lured there again, under the impression that this time, for real, it's actually going to happen, and to find out that it wasn't him at all. It, once again, was not her dreams coming true. It's devastating. Like, the more we start to explore her story, the more tragic it's always been tragic, obviously, because like we know how it ends. We know that she and Nana had, separated by the time that she had Noel, that she basically was raising him all alone. But once we start getting these details of how many times her heart was shattered, of how many times her hopes, she got her hopes up just, like have them destroyed all over again. I see Remy is saying that I wonder if she did have to reach out to him for help eventually, because she would have been all alone and pregnant. And that's kind of what I'm thinking too, is that because it was her only option, she had to swallow her pride and reach out to him, and kind of like accept that if he can't if he can't raise him together, he can at least, support him that much.
Yeah, and like I get the impression that the switch, I'm not entirely sure how, what brought them back in contact. I would guess that it's possibly something along those lines where like she did have to reach out to him, or even like he reached out, like something changed and there was that need for each other.
Mhm.
But like knowing that they named Noel together, knowing how highly she spoke of Rand when Noel was little before they came to the United States of Asia, knowing that she was willing to come to that country to have Noel meet Rand and potentially kind of be that family, like it indicates to me that the final breaking point for her in this episode is him casting out the idea of their future and their family by, essentially asking her to terminate her pregnancy. And like if we're viewing the conception of Noel as that like idea of hope for their relationship, he is shutting that all down by asking for it to be removed. And so that was the final point for her. But we know that Noel came into the world either way, whether she lied and was going to raise him on her own, or it was a failed abortion, where at some point before he was born, Rand found out that this child was actually on the way. And Rand just reads to me like, and I think this is ultimately because, I've always read Rand as somebody who does actually want to be a father and feels, love for these children, but isn't able to be a father and prioritize, like,
He has to prioritize obligation.
Yeah, he has to prioritize these other things because of the choices that he made before these kids existed. That if Noel was on the way and there was now nothing that could be done to stop it, I do think that he would have accepted that and like claimed the kid and, kind of I'm sorry, that was a cat. we're full of interruptions tonight.
Right, I get what you're saying though, because it's kind of like it's not that he didn't want to have Noel. It feels very much like it was like this is the only option. It was I cannot be the father to this child that you need. I cannot be the partner that you need. So it's in our best interest to terminate this.
Yeah.
And when it turns out that that child is still around after all, it's not so much that like I didn't want this as much as like you said, I think he's going to be involved. He doesn't want to be an absent father. He doesn't want to, he doesn't want this child to have the life he had where there was nobody there for him.
And so, like, I ultimately think that while I don't know exactly what would have led Rand to that information, I think that once he had it, that flipped the switch for kind of what Rand was saying to her, where, now he wants to help them. He's going to help name the kid. He's excited, possibly even about, their son's arrival, even if it's ultimately frightening. And with the final straw for Nessa being the fact that he had cast out that possibility, if Rand had then flipped the switch and was willing to be present and support them and be a father in whatever ways he could, it likely kind of, again, like reinvigorated that hope in her.
Mm-hmm.
And that like idea that, maybe it's, maybe they can't have the family that she wanted to have. Maybe they can't have that. Maybe one day they can. I don't know where her mind was at that point, but just that it wasn't that he didn't want it at all, would completely cast us out. He's open to it now, right?
Right.
That, and I think that is probably what flipped her switch back on him and brought her back to that place where she would speak so highly about him to Noel. She would want them to meet. They were in contact. She was updating him. They named Noel together, instead of that get out of my life, you're horrible.
I also think with what little we know about her, I think we can deduce that Nessa could possibly have been a hothead. And she's very justified in her feelings in this time, like why she is so angry and hurt and why she just is so full of resentment and pushing him away. But right, like you said, I think it feels very much that coming to that conclusion months later that okay, this is happening, so I have to make the best with what we have. And if the best is that Rand is going to, send money and I will send updates and we'll keep in touch this way, then fine, this is what we're going to have to do.
Yeah, and and just to kind of tie that back, because I know the original thing was her coming to the United States of Asia. It very likely ties into that where if she then had that kind of reignited hope and positive opinion of Rand, and they were exchanging these letters, which we know that they were, and then once Yui finds out about the affair when Noel is about 5 years old, then she writes the letter to Rand inviting them to Korea. Noel has already been asking about meeting his father. She's already, kind of hopeful about that potential family that they have, that potential future. Maybe there has been talk and efforts of them being able to be more of a family, of Rand meeting their son. And then she gets this letter from him inviting her to come meet him.
Right. And
It makes sense.
Right. And and to even tie those two ideas together, even if it was something where she wasn't trying to get her hopes up about her relationship with him, but the idea that at least Noel being near his father, being able to, be a part of that family, and just all of that. And again, just that tragedy of getting your hopes up, even if it's not about her wanting to have a relationship with Rand at this time, and it's more about, maybe Noel can be a part of their life, maybe he can be a part of their family, and it turns out that it wasn't Rand inviting her at all, that it is in fact a trap, and that just like Rand got imprisoned, they now are caught in the same trap as well.
Exactly.
Oh,
And so that is very much how I think that Nessa got there. I think that something happened that changed the way she left off with Rand, which is indicated by, all those letters and the fact that he was involved in the naming and the way that she was talking about him. And then when Noel was about 5, the affair came to light. The fact that there was another heir came to light, and Yui took her opportunity.
and yeah, like thinking about it too, I feel like Nessa was probably the only person that Rand could really confide in. Like, we can see from that one letter that we've seen how, Nessa talks about how she's sorry that the world couldn't protect him, and how it feels like maybe as they did rekindle whatever, as she decided not to cast him out of his life, that as they continued to talk, maybe she decided that if I can't have all of him, then I will have the best
What I
parts
can.
of him. Right. Like, not even like I'll have what I can, but I will have the best parts of him. I will have the secret parts that nobody else gets to see. Like, there will always be a part of him that is mine and only mine.
It's so sad. It's so tragic.
And like the worst part is obviously that like we know how it all ends, because it's like, it's that thing about how with everything else in I Love You, where it's all very loose ends right now. We don't know how things are going to end. We have some situations and characters like Alyssa where we're very worried that maybe it is going to be very tragic. But like with Nessa, we know exactly how tragic it is. And so the more that we learn these details and see just how tragic it was to be okay with like having just a part of him, of having like the secret parts of him, learning to be okay with being in the shadows after all, when like you so desperately, passionately didn't want that. When she so desperately wanted all of him. And like the fact that it is on some level a sacrifice, like it's clearly one that she must have made some kind of peace with, because, the way that they came into the situation, the way that she speaks of him to Noel. But the point is, like, she's still, in the end, she still ultimately was the one making sacrifices. Like, to the very end, she was the one who was always losing at his expense.
Yeah, and Remy Marlin brought up an interesting point of wondering if the fact that Nessa had an absent father correlated to kind of the way that she handled Rand, either in like the way that she was, wanting Rand's love and being okay with just a part of him, or the possibility of a family and like Noel having a father. And I would say like he probably did, especially after Nana. Like if they had a rocky relationship, but especially with the way that she seems to have so often, whenever the opportunity came up, tried to bring Noel to meet Rand after disappointment after disappointment. We see them at this park in Kousuke's memory multiple times. We have explicit confirmation one time that she was looking for Rand, that she came to this country for Noel to be able to meet Rand, and like a insinuation in later ones that, she was still expecting to meet Rand there. Where like she was trying so hard to let Noel have a father. And that is probably very likely tied into how her father was absent. And she did have, she did love Rand so much and have a high opinion of him and wanted that family and wanted that life.
Right. Like I'm still very on board for I'm not sure if she thought that she could make that relationship with Rand, but definitely Noel having the functioning family, especially the idea of, injecting him into Rand's other family, because, you know, it's one thing for her to be the other woman, you know, like in, you know, like their very traditional their very traditional marriage, there was no room for Rand to have, you know, two wives. There's no room for him to have like his business relationship and his, you know, true love. But there's no reason that he cannot have, you know, his other son. Like, you know, Yui's issues aside, there was no reason that Rand could not have, you know, both of his sons in his life. And that was probably the thinking, is that, you know, like, even if I cannot have him, if my son can have him, then, you know, that at least is better. You know, if he can at least have that family unit that she was never able to, if he could be surrounded by love, like, again, the tragedy of it, thinking that, you know, like, bringing him closer to Rand would like provide him with more love and support, when ultimately it cost him all of the love and support he'd ever had. It's just like it's tragedy after tragedy. Like, we're just like repeating that all night right now, but that's exactly what it is.
It's I cry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just like the like every time we talk, I just envision the like bleats pathetically, and I'm like, that's me. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, the motherly urge to give your son a father in his life. And yeah, that seems very much like what she was doing.
And I think that brings a good point to kind of like talk about the ramifications of how Noel came to be, and the fact that, you know, we don't know, like, we clearly know that an abortion was meant to take place. We don't know if she lied and didn't go through with it, or if there was a failed abortion. We do know that in Ireland, abortion was at this time so illegal, and we do know that in cases where abortion is illegal, abortions are far more dangerous, and you do have more cases or more chances of a failed abortion to occur. And I think it's been guesstimated that she would have been about 3 to 4 months pregnant as well at this time, so that would probably factor into this as well. And just like either or, like, no matter which way it goes, there's just so much narrative impact to, you know, whichever way it goes, because, you know, we definitely get the sense that she was kind of coerced into this. Maybe that, you know, like, she herself agreed that, you know, given the circumstances, this is probably the best option. Did she want to do it? No. Did she see another option? Probably not. Um, but, you know, like, I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was Remy who had pointed this out, that, you know, like, if it was that Nessa lied about the abortion, then it kind of continues that theme of how Nessa really was the only person who ever really chose Noel, you know? Like, we see that not even Nana chose him. Clearly, Rand didn't choose him. The other implication of it being like a failed abortion, and I want to like be very clear that the way I'm talking about this is, like I said, when it comes to abortion, I feel very strongly that it's about the choice, right? Whether or not the person really wants to go through with it. And I don't want to say that a failed abortion is like, you know, a secret bundle of joy, because I know that that's not always the case. You know, for a lot of people, a failed abortion would very much still be like a horrible tragedy. But I think in Nessa's case, we see that like there was a part of her that maybe did not want to go through with it. And you know, granted, the circumstances were still really bad because she's been kicked out by her mother. She can never return. Her lover has returned to his real family, his, you know, business, his other son. But it like really reinforces that symbology, that theme of Noel, the fighter, the champion, the tiger. And that, you know, even though it's not that Nessa, quote, quote, chose him in the same way as the other version, it's still that it still has that mentality of like they were they only ever had each other, and they're both narratively so good and again so tragic. And I'm really interested to see what it might turn out to be.
And like something that I really liked in this, and like this is based very largely on speculation, but like when we get into Nana and Nessa's relationship, like so far we've gotten the implication that Nana was not a very easy parent for Nessa, potentially not a great mother for her. Not that she didn't love Nessa, but that, she wasn't really prepared to be a single mother. And we know that we know that Nana raised Nessa on her own, and that, Nessa's father isn't present in their life. And it seems very much like the reason this was so explosive was because she saw her life path in what was happening to Nessa. And like, I get the impression that, Nana's, the similar names are going to kill me.
I know, the ends.
The ends. That like, Nana's pregnancy might have also been, a surprise or unplanned, and that she, unlike Nessa, might not have wanted to actually go through with it, but didn't feel like she had another option the other way around, and had Nessa and struggled to be a mom because of it, and struggled to have that relationship and that parenting. And then when Nessa comes around with Rand, this person that Nana doesn't have a great opinion of, probably saw that his ambitions were bigger than them and saw that it might have a negative impact on her daughter's life, that kind of like anticipation of you won't be enough for him and it's going to hurt you. And then he's married overseas in this corporation with a child, and he comes back and he romances your daughter again, and they can't be together this time, and now she's having an affair with him, and she's still so alone. And then she gets pregnant, and now it's, that like repeat of the you're gonna be a single mother with this married man who has another child, who has never put you first, whose ambitions are, going to leave you behind, have already left you behind. And you're going down the same life path that I am for this man, and it's gonna destroy you. And then comes the I'm getting an abortion, I'm terminating it, with like, we don't know exactly what Nessa's like opinion, like, oh my god, the names again. We don't know exactly what Nana's thought process was, but just the way that she must have been seeing so much of her own life regrets playing out in Nessa, and especially from the opposite viewpoint, where if she felt like she didn't have a choice the other way, which like you were saying earlier, like the big pinnacle is that choice, and that like being able to decide whether or not it's right for you. And if neither of these women were actually able to make the choice they wanted and were being pressured into those opposite choices of each other, and like Nana is just projecting this life history onto Nessa, is seeing the way that this is going. And in case you just said, I Love You is a series full of cycles, and Nana didn't want Nessa to fall into it again, because if she did, she knew that it would never end. And like exactly where like Nana is so likely projecting this, and just all of this at once is so much. And she casts out her daughter in that like kind of hot-headed fit of projection, and like in a very similar way that Rand chastises Noel for all the things that he sees of himself in Noel, and leads him straight towards that path of misery in an attempt to lead him away from it. Nana saw this cycle repeating itself with her daughter, and in a fit of hot-headed rage cast her out, and put her in that position of being alone and vulnerable, and ultimately where her fate led her to. And like you said,
oh, go on. You can finish
I
your
was,
thought.
okay. I was just gonna say, like you said, Nessa, whether or not she actually, like, whether or not it was a failed abortion or she lied, like, the inkling that Nessa didn't want to make that choice, that wasn't what she wanted. She wanted to have the child and have that family. Like, the fact that, she was the only one who wanted it. Nana wanted the child to have never been conceived, for that relationship to have never happened, for Nessa's life to be completely different. Rand didn't think that it was okay to have the child, wasn't able to be with Nessa, wasn't allowed to have that family. And Nessa just wanted the important people in her life to support her and make it okay with her and, fight for it with her and build a life and family with her. And when they didn't, she didn't get to be that priority for them. She didn't get to be supported by them. And she then went at it alone. And it was, like you said, like, they only had each other from it.
And I think there's a really important point to be made about how Nana probably sees herself in Nessa. Because, like you said, we can probably deduce by the fact that the police were involved that Nana does not approve of abortions, and she did not approve of the choice that Nessa made. But likewise, because she sees herself in Nessa, it could very well be because, like you said, because she doesn't believe that they're okay, it was never an option to her. Like, I suppose adoption could have been, but like the point is, Nana is probably a person who probably felt that she was obligated to raise her child on her own. And I'm not saying that I think she regrets having her daughter, and I'm not saying that I think she regrets being a parent, but I think that there is a good argument to be had about people who kind of get forced into parenthood when they aren't ready, when they don't want to be. People who don't think that, or who don't realize that they have other choices, whether or not it's like a moral objection or whatever reason it is. You think about teenagers who get pregnant while they're still in high school, and their parents force them to be with their really awful high school boyfriend who is never going to amount to anything, and like the misery it puts them into in that relationship, and the kind of stress that it creates in the parent-child relationship. We've admitted that Nana was probably a very difficult mother, and it's not that we think that she was a bad mother. It's not that we think she wasn't trying. It's just that she too was a single mother with probably no support system, who was doing the best she could with what little she had, what little she knew. And that's a very difficult situation. And there could be a very valid sense of resentment, especially if she, does not agree with abortion as a choice, but B, the fact that her daughter made that choice that she never felt she was allowed to. That sort of resentment of, I went through with this and I have dealt with this, and you're taking, perhaps seeing it as like she was taking the easy way out, as some people might view it, even though I think we all understand that for Nessa, again, with the fact that it feels very strongly like she maybe she didn't want to make that choice, even if it was that she agreed to make the choice and that she acknowledged that this was the best choice of action. The point is, there was a part of her that maybe regretted that she didn't have the other option. And again, for her to be left alone with no support system, nobody to, grieve what she lost, what she couldn't have, the fact that the man that she loves was going back to his family. She couldn't go back to her mom. Who did she get to go cry to when, her feelings caught up to her? Who did she get to, who was there to soothe her when all of her agony and her anguish caught back up to her? Because that's a point that I really feel like needs to be stressed, is that it's not an easy decision to make. Even if you are 100% on board with the choice that you're making, it is still a difficult choice, even if you know that it is the best choice and that like going through with that pregnancy would, like make your life that much harder. It's still so difficult, Um, and she didn't have anyone to talk to about it. She didn't have anyone to comfort her about it. She didn't have anyone to reassure her that she made the right choice. Instead, her mother kicked her out and told her not to return. She involved the police. Like, it
And it's
just gets to me because, like, it's very much that parallel to Kousuke, how Noel went to him in that very desperate moment where he had nobody else, like no one else to turn to. Nessa needed somebody. She needed her mother, and her own mother cast her out when she needed her the most.
it's like it's so like it's so tragic, and she was left so very alone. Just her, and whether she knew it or not at the time, Noel, and like
The
and Rand
grief,
offers,
the
yeah,
shame,
yes,
because
and
it's that shame of like we get that sense that everything that she did with Rand was with this sense that they were going to be together. Like like we said earlier at the beginning of this, she didn't want to be the other woman. So she's left with all of this grief, this shame, this anguish and devastation with nowhere to go and nobody to like comfort her.
and like Rand, in this meeting, like we've talked already about how he did not really offer her any emotional comfort or security, but even with, being cast out by Nana, he doesn't, he seems to be of this like idea that, which I mean, the foundation of this idea is kind of correct, that the biggest problem between Nessa and Nana is her relationship with Rand and Rand's involvement in her life. But then where he kind of gets it wrong is like he seems to have this thought that once he leaves and once this is done, they'll eventually reconcile. These are two hot-headed women who just had a falling out. They've maybe had falling outs before, and as much as he feels guilty that this happened, and he obviously feels bad that this has happened to her, he has seemingly this belief that they're going to reconcile, because when he gives her the money, well, first he's like, he's talking as if she'll come around, and Nessa's like, no, she called the police, she does not want me back. And then when he gives her the money, he says it'll keep you and your mother afloat for a while, again insinuating that they'll be able to come back together, because otherwise how would that money reach her mother? Where
Right.
He's not even offering that like validation and comfort for what has happened, that we now know was a lifelong falling out, that they never spoke to each other again, that was it.
Oh.
Nessa was on her own. But Rand, who is also leaving her in such a harsh and cold way, isn't
Like, hey,
offering her
I know you just like aborted our child and our hopes and dreams and our future together. I got a dash, so here's some money. Let me know if you need a home or a job, if there's anything I can do for you, except leave my wife and my family and my other son. Got a jet. Thanks, Rand. Thanks.
like, great, you made it so much better.
So much. And obviously, like, the real tragedy of it is that if Nana had been more empathetic, if she had not been so rash and judgmental, if she had just sat and heard out her daughter, who again, as I reiterate, needed her so desperately, because like, it's clear to us that Nessa was not engaging with Rand thinking, knowing that he was married. She clearly was engaging thinking that, okay, he's made me think that there's a future, that there's an opportunity, that something's going to come of this, and like all of this comes to be, and he's like, you gotta terminate that, and I gotta skedaddle. Bye. Like, like
And
Nana
it's
could have
just like,
sat down with her and, comforted her, even if she, pulled the I told you that man is trash, like she still could have been there. And instead she kicked her out. Like,
and
no,
never came back. Like
never.
Nana did make that choice final. She didn't know that Null existed. She
She
didn't
admitted
stop.
that she never searched for her.
Yeah,
She
she
didn't reach
just
out.
kicked her out and left it that way. And like that's such a harsh thing. And like like she's trying to make up for that every day with the way that she takes care of Noel and how she's a better parent to him than she was to Nessa. But it was such a clean break and such a harsh break. And
And there's just, yeah, I know that we were kind of talking about this earlier, but there's a deep tragedy about it and the fact that it didn't have to end that way. If, she had been the mother that her daughter needed in that moment, if she had reached out, if she had not been so judgmental. And that's that thing about parents that we talk about a lot on the pod, is that parents fail so much because they are ultimately humans as well. And Nana, much like Ran, much like Simhan, we see this too, sees so much of herself in her daughter, and that like all of her efforts to derail what she thinks is her daughter's, like train wreck, have failed. And she's like, I'm not going to keep trying. We've kind of seen this with Simhan, who thinks that like if he keeps Shanae in this box, he's going to be able to protect her. And all it's done is made, it's created a lot of strife between them. Like not even just between like his whole like, oh, don't talk to boys thing, but like the fact that he didn't want her to have a job, and like she had to get a job because he was drinking their money away and he wasn't able to make enough to support them. It's like like I don't say this to demonize parents. I say it to humanize them, is that parents fail so often. But the problem is when they fail in the way that Nana did, where she, it took until she had lost her daughter, like not, like kicked her out, lost her, but until Rand, the man she despised, the man who is the reason that she lost her daughter, reached out to her or reached out to him, to let her know that, hey, by the way, your daughter died in a foreign country. B, do you want to come over here and raise her son that, surprise, exists? That falling out you had about the termination, he's here. It's such a great tragedy that just goes back to if she had the empathy, if she had been the person that her daughter needed, it didn't have to go this way. And like she knows that, like that's part of her like grief, that is part of her atoning in the way that she treats Noel. I can't remember if it was you or somebody else who had pointed out in the chat how like she makes such an effort to make sure Noel, or to tell Noel that he's not a burden, to like reiterate this mentality, because she made Nessa feel like such a burden.
and like
And
and even with the like, she is always saying, I'm gonna keep being around, I'll always be here for you, like you always have me. Where like, Nessa came to her in that time of need and Nana wasn't there for her. And it cost them so much.
And it's like the Nana that we know is the result of all of her mistakes, obviously. Like she has learned from the mistakes that she made. She has learned that she needs to be more and empathetic. She needs to be more open. She tries so hard to coax Noel into opening up to her because she did not let Nessa open up to her. She was, Nessa wasn't able to do that. She is still under the impression that Nessa took her own life, and she probably largely believes that it has to do with her casting her out and isolating her and leaving her with nobody. So right, we see much like the way that Kousuke treats Shanae to make up for the way that he has treated Noel, we see Nana doing the same with Noel, trying to do better than what she did for him. She has clearly learned from those mistakes, but it's the fact that it took such grave mistakes for her to learn.
And I mean, isn't that the theme of everyone who loved Nessa?
Poof. Ah.
But like talking about like Nana, how things could have been different for them if, she had heard her out, if that situation gone differently, how it didn't have to be that way. Like it opens this door into kind of the what ifs about especially Ressa. And there are two where it's very like what could have been, what ifs, what if a different choice had been made, especially because the thing that, really pushed them apart in the universe that we have was Rand choosing his ambitions and choosing Kousuke and going back to Yui and, leaving Nessa alone and then regretting those choices later on. But that opens up kind of the door of like thinking about the different roads that we have and the different outcomes and the different choices and what they actually mean.
Right. Like how easy it is to think about, like what if Rand had not been so ambitious? What if he had made the initial choice to choose Nessa in the first place? Like I think this especially came up in like that sense of like if he could go back in time and change something kind of thing, like because obviously I don't think there was a world where Rand was going to make that choice. It sounds like he was so ambitiously driven that he had himself convinced that whatever he had with Nessa was this passing fancy, something that he was going to get over, he could live without. Maybe he had convinced himself that it didn't mean what it did. Maybe it was something very similar to Noel, where like Noel admits that he can't identify love for what it is because he's never really felt it, like the only thing he has to compare it to is his relationship with Alyssa, where, he had a crush on this girl and it went so badly awry. And what if that's what this is? What if it's just that somebody is finally being nice to me and taking notice of me and I'm confusing it for love? And so, for Rand, who, we said he aged out of the system, he never really had a family, he never really had emotional security. How could he recognize what he had with Nessa when, he dreamt of so much more? But it's like, okay, even if there was that one world where he made that choice, could he have been happy? Because he was such an ambitious man. Like Nessa says that I should have listened to my mother from the start, which implies long before this, like even before the affair and the pregnancy, it implies that like Nana never liked Brand, and like she said so much to Shanae. It's like even before Rand was like Randolph Hirahara, like what kind of man was he? Was he like an arrogant man? Was he somebody who put on a lot of airs? Did he feel like he's too big for this small world that they come from? Like I think you mentioned this earlier, is that sensing that he's too much for what they can provide, like that Nessa was never going to be enough because all she can provide is love, and unfortunately we know that very often love is not always enough.
And like, even if it wasn't his ambition, which it very likely, like, I mean, that's already what ultimately was their end in this universe, if you like track it back, like, and it was a problem for so long for them, where like, even if it wasn't exactly his ambition, like, she, like, they came from two different places. They were going to different places. They had different values. They had different experiences. And like you said, like love isn't always enough. Where like had he chosen to stay with them, had he, maybe he built up some of what he has now and it was, he decided it was enough for him and, they had a life. would there not have been something else that came in the way? Would there not have been other obstacles? If Nana and Nessa hadn't fought over this, would it have been something else? And that kind of like I like to think of like would Rand have made different choices with what he knows now? I think absolutely. That man carries so much regret and so much hurt over like what happened and how his choices hurt other people and destroyed their lives, because like, you know, he looks around him and he just sees his failure and destruction everywhere. You know, his loveless abusive business marriage, his cold son following his, you know, ambitious to a fault but for nothing real footsteps, the way that he wasn't able to be a father to either of his children, the child who feels like he's a burden and unloved and isn't allowed to exist in the world, who wasn't supposed to exist in the world, the woman that he loved that died because of her involvement with him, the broken relationships, the broken families, this like life with nothing to show for it aside from what he was chasing, that status. Or like I think he would absolutely choose something different. But the question is like what does different actually mean? You know, because every different choice that you make just leads you down a different road. Like Shanae was saying at the end of the Shinlissa flashback, where like she has that understanding with her and Alyssa where, you know, even if things had gone differently in middle school, what would that actually mean? You know, she's on this road now, and if things had been different, she would just be on a different road and has no idea what it would look like. Where like none of them are going to be this ideal, perfect situation that, you know, because we only see the problems that came out of these choices. Where
Right.
every choice is going to have their positives and negatives and their different elements. And like, you know, Rand knew that he was signing things away when he made that deal. He didn't quite know how much, but you know, he made those choices. He weighed his options and thought that this came up better. He knew that he was signing things away. And when you make different choices, it's like, you know, those choices are only going to be different. There's going to just be different trade-offs, different weights of those pros and cons, and you have no way of knowing what the obstacles that are going to arise are until they do, but they're going to be there either
Right.
way.
And it's so easy to idealize them because ultimately we want better for them. You know, we know that they both have been heavily denied that love and security and comfort, and especially now that we see just how much that Nessa has really lost out over and over. It's so easy to idealize them and think that, you know, like if they could have been together, everything would have been better. And I don't like the idea of painting the illusion that like everything is worse because of Yui. Like we do know that like so much of the story exists because of Yui. Like her antagonism has driven so much of the story, and this is true. But it's not to say that, you know, Nessa and Rand could have had a perfect marriage if he had made that choice. I did say that um, had she and Rand never like really reconnected and she had just stayed and raised Noel on her own, like maybe they could have had a happy, if not, you know, very difficult, tumultuous, you know, relationship growing up. Because, you know, like we know that Noel was at least, you know, safe when Yui didn't know he existed. Um, but you know, like if we think about if Rand, this very ambitious man, had chosen love instead of prestige and fortune, could he have been satisfied with that? You know, would you know it? We have to acknowledge that he might have regretted the things that he didn't choose, and very much in the same way that, like, obviously, as he entered this relationship with Yui and he was adopted into this family and it turned out to be nothing like he expected or anticipated. It made him realize everything that he had given up and what he had actually sacrificed, and that maybe the payoff that he expected was not actually paying out the way that he anticipated it. You know, how do we know that he would have been satisfied in that very different life? Nana describes Nessa as a very salt of the earth woman. We get that sense, we know she says herself that like she's always, I always make do. We get that sense that she's been good at taking nothing and making something out of it. But Rand is a person who is chasing these big dreams. He's also making something out of nothing, but in like a very different way. He's trying to build that status and prestige. He has seen that. How did you say it earlier that like wealth and prestige endures far more than anything else? To him, status is like that is how you build yourself. So it's like even though they clearly loved each other so much. Like Rand tells her, "I need you to live," and like we know that there's like truth in that because as we have seen, Rand is like this empty husk of a man, and I think losing her was like the end for him. Like he hasn't lived since. But it's like at the same time, it's like you have to be okay with letting go of those dreams for this dream. And could he have done that? Like now, yes, he can. Like he knows what he lost and what he needs. And, he's been able to realign those values and understand things. But, we all know that hindsight's 2020. Like when we get into like the what ifs, it's like, okay, what are like the rules of this universe we're creating? Is this like we're going back in time and Rand is just making that choice, or is it he's making a choice with what he knows? Because that still creates this other scenario where it's like, okay, because like if we're taking Rand and he's going back in time to change the choice he made, and he is like this version of himself who's locked away all of that warmth and all of that love and like every part of himself that Nessa had loved, could she love that version of him? Like if he could not unlock that part of himself, it's just like when we get into the what ifs, like I feel like you have to establish like the kind of rules of the universe that you're establishing. Otherwise, like we can just run all over the place with it.
And it's just that like we can't know what it looks like until it does. Where like we can think and we can like try to pan through it and try to see what it could have been, what could have happened, but we'll never know and he'll never know. And like the version of Rand that we have now with all of these regrets is the version who would make that different choice. But the version of Rand that we have is only that version because he didn't.
Right. It's the same with Nana, how like she is only this version of herself because of what she lost. Like she had to learn from her mistakes to become this person. Rand had to learn from his mistakes. And like I still feel like Rand has only recently come to understand and grasp the importance of that emotional security. I feel like that's one of the very significant points of him going to Kousuke and leaving Noel with Shanae and his friends is like acknowledging that these are the people who can provide him more emotional security than I can. I need to go to Kousuke because I haven't been able to provide that, and he doesn't have that from anyone else. And it feels like this is the first time that he seems to be coming to that realization. Because, like, even we see it even at the formal where he's, telling Noel to play your role. Go stay by Alyssa's side. Stop chasing after people and trying to be friends with them. Stop acting like a fool. He is telling him to put your status first, to put your image first. And we understand that he's doing this because he feels like people are going to take advantage of those things. And they do. Yui definitely does. But, Noel standing up for himself is because he's choosing, in a sense, he is choosing that emotional security. He doesn't want to keep playing this false image like Rand asked. He wants to go be authentic. He wants to go help somebody who needs help. And, this is that time that he's fighting back because it actually means something to him. I think this is like the first time that Rand's starting to really grasp the, like the importance of that emotional security that, like status and prestige and wealth. None of this really means anything if you don't have that, baseline security as well.
And like I very much agree that I think now is really the time that he's processing it. I get the impression that throughout his life, up until the point where Nessa died, he had been wrestling between these things, right? Knowing that he wants both of them and trying to figure out what he needs. And ultimately, the thing that he had in the end was that status that he had built and that achievement. Like, that's what was there for him to go home to. And in a very, very, uh, overt way, love lost. You know, Yui killed it. Well, I assume it's Yui, but
I mean,
but like,
even if like she didn't, like it was her involvement that still, did. So like,
yeah,
she did.
we're
She
like
did.
the institution of that business killed that love, and like that's a very overt way to symbolize in his life that like emotional security lost and physical security was at the end of the day what stood up and what he had to go home to. And I think at that point, like you said, like it kind of, he got into that solidification of like, we have to survive and this is what we have to do in order to survive and this is what we have to uphold. And it really wasn't until, this past arc that he really let himself bring out that emotional security with, reaching out to both of his sons and, trying to encourage them to reach out in the world and leaving Noel with the people who care about him and going to Kousuke and trying to fight for them and, for their emotional security and like especially going back to that pond and finally paying his respects to Nessa. Where like it seems like did not like he's always likely felt guilt and shame about what happened and felt such strong remorse, but he said that he never made it there. He never made it to that pond. He was never ready to go and pay those respects until now. And likely that change is that kind of like honest acceptance and realization of everything that happened. And like one thing that has come up in our conversation about this flashback is like the paneling of it and the coloring of it. And like I would very much also stream Trashellie Pod episode 5 for the flashback color theory. But like that summary of like Rand has never forgiven himself for what happened to her and he honors her memory by being honest with himself feels very much like the way that this flashback was paneled and colored and like the fact that he's remembering it now remembering it as he went back to that pond and like reflecting on these different choices and the like way that he weighed emotional security and physical security and how now he understands the true value that had and everything that he had lost and the way that his choices were what lost it for him and it's gone forever now. Like it just feels very much like this version of Rand has really only now come to that place physically and emotionally.
It was the way that he carried that Bible around, but I get the sense that he didn't indulge in it. Like
Mhm.
he carried her memory, but he didn't engage with it. When Eugene asked if he goes there often, he admitted that this is the first time he ever has. I definitely had the sense that he's never allowed himself to grieve her because he doesn't think he deserves it. Because how
Mhm.
can he deserve to grieve for somebody who he basically put in this situation? Even if he was not the one who invited her to, come here to the United States of Asia. It's the fact that that relationship with her, the child that they had together, that he asked her to terminate the relationship that he engaged in, and then he shut down. And, it was all of the broken promises and the false hope that he instilled in her, and the fact that she was this person who like if she was anything like Noel, if she was anything the way that Nana remembers her, she was probably a very larger than life person who probably had so much going for her. And, she tied herself to this man who clearly did not deserve her. it just he knows that he didn't deserve to grieve for somebody who was only in this situation because of the way that he put her there, the way that he selfishly, engaged with her. I said this earlier about the memory, but like you're saying too about how it's such an authentic memory in the color and the lack of distortions. Like we see in Kousuke's memories, how he scribbles out things that he represses that he doesn't want to remember clearly. We see in some of Noel's memories like that inverse coloring. We've seen in Shanae's recollections of the Kim formal night, just like actual, like super distortions and, like pixelated imagery and stuff. But for Rand, like he's remembering everything authentically, right down to his guilt and his shame, that helplessness he had in front of her. Like he, there are ways that he could have distorted that memory, whether, it was like in the coloring, that could have affected how he recalls it and how he sees himself. But he sees himself in that very authentic way as the man who failed this woman he loved. And right, like he didn't allow himself to grieve her. He didn't feel like he was allowed to. He didn't go to this place that I think we have concluded is clearly was meant to be like a rendezvous point of theirs, some place that was meant to be theirs. I do know, like we know that like church is a kind of a place that is implied to be kind of their thing, but it's like how often has he really gone there? It goes back to that thing where I think he has carried her ghost with him all of this time as atonement, like penance for what he did and for his role in her loss. And like knowing that, like again, like I keep harping on that point about like how cruel it was to ask her to terminate that pregnancy and then leave her, knowing that she can't go back to her home, even if it is like you said that maybe he thought, oh, they're going to get over this, they'll make up in time. It's so. Did he think about the gravity of that situation, like what it meant? Did it weigh on his mind? Like we know that he clearly treasures Noel because he carries that picture around in his Bible. We know that Noel is a reflection of the love he shared with Nessa, something that was real and true. But it's like, how much did determination, before he knew that, it didn't happen or, it didn't work or whatever it was, how much did it weigh on his soul that, he lost that with her? Because like it's one of those things where like obviously this scene is very much about her grief and her resentment and his what's the word I'm looking for? He's so resigned to it. Like he knows he can't refute any of this. Like he has no grounds because she's right. But it's also like, did he also feel that same grief? Because we've talked a lot about how Nessa was also isolated, and as harsh as we're being on Rand, like we do know he still had nobody. It's not like his relationship with Yui meant anything, and who did he have to confide in about this relationship? Who did he have to confide in about what he's lost in terms of that relationship, but also the child that they could have had together? The tragedy is just like we keep saying it over and over, but the tragedy is just so deeply woven, and it's endless. And I know the more of these flashbacks we get, like once we get to see what else is in the Bible, it's going to be so painful. I just know it.
It's like you said, like Rand has been carrying her around like a ghost for this whole time, but this feels like the version of Rand who has finally reconciled with what she actually meant and what the realities of their life was, and like reflected and sat with his choices. And like I say a lot about and like I talk a fair amount about like Rand and Alyssa being parallels, and like Rand was somebody who needed that emotional security and connection, but like didn't have the sense that it was enough, very much in the way that like Alyssa back in middle school didn't have the sense that, you know, she was enough to be accepted and Shanae's acceptance was enough for her, and like chased something else instead because of that lack of perspective that it was enough. And like it felt like Rand before was kind of in that parallel place of like carrying around the scars of that past and the ghost of that past and being haunted by it, but not having truly processed it. Whereas this version of Rand is the version that has realized those elements that led him to make those choices, has realized what he lost, what he could have had, the fact that, you know, emotional security could have been enough, that Nessa could have been enough, and how his, you know, inability to see it and chasing of a different road that he thought was going to get him what he needed led to losing everything. And, you know, all of the ramifications of that and the acceptance and honesty and reality of it.
And I know that there's kind of this running theme of Rand kind of tying up loose ends, you know, like the death flags all over the place. But I feel like maybe this is him finally letting her go. Like, you know, he gives the Bible to Noel because he knows that Noel is going to need it. He tells Shanae that it hasn't brought him luck in a long time. But I think, you know, like I said, I think he's carried her around as penance, not so much as like her being someone he couldn't let go of, but somebody he wouldn't let himself let go of. And now that, you know, like you said, he's finally acknowledging this, he's embracing this, and importantly, he's ready to actively fight back for his children, you know, even if maybe he has to sacrifice Kousuke a little bit. We'll discuss that at another time. We don't want to cry about that right now. Like, you know,
to cry about.
too many other things. Too many other things to cry. It does feel like he's finally letting her go. And letting go like the ghost of her, the ghost of what he did, and kind of setting her free. And as much as I think he gave the Bible to Noel because it was part of that penance for him, he did not want to, you know, he didn't think that he deserved to keep this anymore, that, you know, Noel deserves it a lot more than he does. I think, you know, I don't think he'd let her go until this moment. I think that's what, you know, going to that pond is. It's, you know, like, it's truly sending her off, you know, that funeral that they never got to have for her, that actual send off that never happened. Like, that's, you know, he's freeing the ghost and saying, you know, we've made our peace, and he's going to fight his fight and pay for whatever sins in whatever way he has to.
He has finally paid his respects and, as you said, let her go. And with that, I am crying.
I'm impressed that you hide it in your voice better, because like I had to cut myself off way earlier. I know what it was. Like the first time we were talking about her going through the termination and having nobody that she could go home to. And like I felt the voice breaking. I'm like, I'm done. And then I like squeaked out this very quiet him. And it was because like boom, it was happening. I was like, I'm not gonna sob on pod.
That ship has sailed. We've sobbed on pod.
Cry a lot. It's okay. It's okay. Everyone's used to it. Everyone's used to it.
It's a cry-worthy story.
It is though. Like I feel like I don't want to say that I was like never into the Nessa and Rand story, because that's not it. It's just more like I don't think we ever had the details for me to get as into it as I feel like we are right now. You know, like I said earlier, I definitely was operating on this notion that maybe Nessa knew exactly what she was doing, and like I was okay with that because like it's fictional, you know. And it just changes everything to know how hurt and angry she was and what he asked of her and how he left her so alone, and like how her mother cast her out as a result of it, and that concept of like how it really was Noel and Nessa against the world for so long, you know, the two of them, and how it's so clear she loved him so much, you know, like despite all of the circumstances he was so important to her, and their time together was so short. And I think that's like the other tragedy that really gets to me is that, like it's the fact that Noel has like all those memories where he's like, what if I'm, misremembering it? What if she wasn't really that good person that I thought she was? What if, that's who she was in front of me? Because like, parents have to. And just like, I know like that's something that we cry about so much, is like children not realizing how much their parents do care. Because again, I know we've been, like trashing Rand up and down this this episode, but like I still feel so strongly for him and his circumstances, even if he made those choices. Like at the end of the day, it's I
It's
I
like
know that we probably won't get to see these characters have those moments with their parents, but I need Noel to know how desperately he was loved by both of them. How even though he wasn't meant to be, he was supposed to be terminated. He was an accident in every single way, but despite that, he was desperately loved by both of them, and I want him to know that.
and it's just like you said, like it's one thing for like in both our case and Noel's case, like it's one thing to know the story. It's one thing to be told it, to have an idea of what happened. Like, we've always known how their story ended. We've always had an idea of what it was like. But like to be in those memories and to feel it and like feel all the breadth of emotion in it, even in just a small snippet, like it's such a different experience. And like that, like I feel like that is the experience that we're having with this flashback of like knowing what their life was like and being told versus feeling what they felt and the implications of it and the context and the effect on the rest of the world and themselves.
And
And
you know
like
something that we didn't actually talk about that I'm thinking about now is don't call out the shaky voice. You can't perceive it. You just gotta pretend it's not there.
I'm I'm sick.
I'm
I have a cold.
I'm Elle's other half of the brain, so I'm clearly experiencing her cold. um Something that I was thinking a lot about when we were watching Kimchi draw or color this is that the colors are so warm for a scene that is so devastating, and how like that running theme of the sunrises and sunsets, and how everything about this feels like it's a finale. This was supposed to be the end. He's going back to his other family, to his other son. She got rid of hers. Everything's great. And like the sun is setting on them. And it's like that juxtaposition of how warm it is, but like how I guess it's like, how we were talking about. It's so obvious how much she loves him because of how angry and hurt she is. Like, she only is so hurt and angry because she loves him so much, because she wants so much, because she's not enough. and there's something about that coloring that really gets to me. How, that sunset effect of how, you know, like we said, we don't know what really leads to her ending up in Korea. We don't know if this was the end of them, and maybe everything in the future was more like, I just want him to be a part of the family, even if he and I can't be that family. I want him to be a part of it. Like that sunset on them, on what they had. Oh, that hurts too.
And like you said, like I was gonna say, like that juxtaposition is like, as much as we know that their lives continue to be intertwined, and that like the amount of love that they held from each other in this scene that caused all of that hurt, like this was like, as much as it was meant to be an ending, and even though it continued, this was the ending of that potential, like that life path that they could have together. After this event, it was gone. Like this was the finale for it. All of those hopes and dreams and the idea of the life that they could have, the expression of that love for each other, that fostering, that potential. Like I've talked about it so much throughout this episode, and like in regards to this flashback, like so much of this was just about the symbolism of the potential life they could have had together, and the fact that this was the ending point for it, that choice was made, and this was that ending. And like the juxtaposition of, like you said, like that warmth in the coloring with so much hurt and devastation, and that like sun setting, it's just
Right? Like that's something that I was really fixated on. I remember talking a lot about it after the stream. It's just like how it was so clear that they were fighting, but there was so much warmth in that lighting. And I guess too, like we see that in the fact that he remembers it with that lighting and how warm it was, that even though this is a cold moment, the end of everything that they had, he still remembers it with that warmth, which is also devastating in its own way. Because if we compare it to, like, say, Shanae and her Shinlissa memory, how, we've talked a lot about how that's very black and white because she has, heavily distorted memories. She's very detached from what happened. It's something that she has tried very hard to repress. That sense of, like, Rand has held on to this as it was. And even though it was such a devastating experience, it still has so much warmth. Like, I mean, I know a sunset is inevitably warm and lighting, but like, you could play with lighting and make it cold. I know you could.
it didn't have to be a sunset.
Right? That too, It's, yeah,
And Lumiere point out the lighting brightens when they touch too.
No, don't do that! Do that to me. Hold on, I've got this pulled up. I'm gonna go look at that now. That's cool. That's okay. You've already heard me
cool.
cry.
That's cool. Everything's fine. It's all good.
That's fine. We're okay. We're okay. But and the thing is, like, with all of the death flags around Rand, it does make me wonder how we're going to get more of their past. If it's going to, so, I feel like we've got to get more flashbacks, right? And like, I guess, we can get some through Nana because we can, see her recollection of events. But I feel like, we have to get a little more from Rand, maybe,
I feel
before
like
he goes.
I feel like because Rand is at like such a climactic point, and like really just now, like we said, like really accepting this past and letting it go, I feel like we will.
Right. Like, it just, I mean, I feel like if this was the only recollection we had from him, it would be so absolutely fitting. But I am selfish and greedy, and I want to see more. like, as much as it hurts, I kind of want to see some of the good parts, just, like, justify all of this, because it's like, like we were saying, it's part of so much of like immersing ourselves in Nessa's experience and her pain. And I want to see snippets of the man that she was holding on to so desperately. I want to see, you know, what she was clinging to, because we get those glimpses through Noel, through like who that persona he put on as Yeong-Gi, we know is probably very much who the Rand she knew was. But I want to see those moments, even if they will inevitably make us cry, because again, we know how the whole thing plays out. But it feels like it's the least she deserves, I guess, is because like so much of what we've shown of Nessa is like the pain and the tragedy. I want to see those good moments too, just because we have enough things to cry over about with her. I want to see the good things, and I want to see more of her past with Noel, because again, it's the fact that it's so clear how much she loved him and how much she tried to make up for, the fact that they were on their own. And like that way that parents try to make things better for their kids, even if it means that they have to hide the circumstances and stuff. Like we've seen that Noel didn't have a lot growing up, but he was so funky, like it was that the way that conversation that he first had with Kousuke went, where like, Kousuke was so mean, and like he was just so persistent. He really wanted to play his game. um I really want to see more of the good things, like I guess not so much to balance the bad ones, but to justify.
I mean, it's
Not
like
even that,
ultimately,
but
like we know that there was more to the story,
mhm.
like we and like I really like what Keaton just said, that like this is like a masterpiece of storytelling, in that like he said, in its tragedy, that this one episode has both brought so many emotions and given everyone so much to pick apart and start to put the puzzle pieces of their past together, like fitting the broken picture frame together. And it's just like there was so much in this, and there's so much in their life and in their history together, and we just have all of these little snippets, but they're really, we have so little. It's just that everything that we get has so much in it. And like this was the prologue of an episode. Like, I don't, like, we all keep joking and being like, I forgot that there was a whole episode after this. But like there was so much packed into it, and the title card hadn't even run yet,
Right. I hold on, I had a thought and it just left me. But yeah, it's the fact that this is just simply a recollection that was spliced in. Um and it does make me wonder where our next episode is going to be taking us, because it's a very interesting place to insert this, especially with what the episodes have been building up to. With the way that this episode cut off, knowing that Kimchi didn't want to separate the events of what's coming up in the next episodes. But yeah, I really want to see, like, okay, so this is going to be so corny, but it reminds me of how, back before J.K. Rowling revealed what trash she was, when we so desperately loved Harry Potter, and how people really badly wanted a prologue with the Marauders and stuff. And how, first off, I'm very grateful that she never wrote it, because God knows she would have ruined everything that like we have fantasized ourselves. But how this is such a different experience, because we have talked a lot about what we thought Rand and Nessa's story might have been like, and obviously we're finding out that there's so much more being revealed than we ever anticipated. Like just talking about the fact that like I always thought maybe Nessa was very aware of what she was doing and that she had justified it, but like I never got deeper into it then, like what was it like to be in this other country yearning and missing him, even when you do know that you're the other woman and you're okay with it. And then to, like give us the story where we find out that she resented this. She hated this. This wasn't something she was proud of. And like that shame that it must have left her with, the way that like all of this coincided. Like we always knew timeline wise that she lost her mother before she had Noel, but to see the way that it lines up this way with the extra impact of like the extra tragedy of what she had to give up, in terms of like the future she wanted, the love she was holding on to, the child that they had conceived, and the fact that she was left so alone. And then, like, he's like, I've got to go back now. Just like for all of it to line up that way. Right. Like, I know, like, one of the arguments about I Love You was that people would feel like there's so many storylines that are just like all over the place. And like, no, you have to realize everything has been converging into this storyline. It's just we had to get here, like everything's been converging. And this story, like it's so clear how all of these events have impacted everything. How we've got like the ramification of Kousuke resenting Nessa for destroying that picturesque ideal image of the family that he thought was so perfect, even though we see from his lived experiences that as it was going on around him, it was there were visual cues that it wasn't perfect, but how that was the thing that he latched onto, because as a child that was the only thing he could, like it was so difficult for him to latch onto that abstract idea of like, my family never was what I thought it was, as well as, my father created a whole other family. And how just like the way that everything interacts is so well done to me. Like we can see how, Noel's existence was a threat from the very beginning. Like he had to be terminated and he wasn't. Like whether or not it was that she didn't, or he was, we're going to say, a fighter. Just it all of it weaves together so well, and every time Kimchi reveals something new to us that has yet to be revealed, it fits right into place. It's just, I say it a lot, is it's so obvious she knows the story she's telling. That's why she was able to, rearrange the parts of the story when she had to, when, like Webtoon made her make adjustments. She knows this story inside out. And that's why it's so good. She's not just like making this up on the fly and just kind of like trying to fit it together. Like everything impacts everything. That
And
was
like
so
you said,
not eloquent. Carry on.
it's just like you said, everything is so connected and everything led to everything else. Nothing in this story exists in a vacuum. And every week, like especially for the past, like this particular arc, like every single week we end up crying about something new and like just having bawling, just another sob session through the night. And every week Kimchi herself is like, why on earth are you all crying? The episode wasn't that sad. But it's the implications of it and the way that each new thing that we get is contextualized with everything else that we had before, and all of the reality that our characters currently share in the past, the way that it's come about. It's just like none of these scenes exist in a vacuum either, because everything is connected and everything is interwoven and everything has implications for something else. And that is so much what makes us all cry every week, as we finally have enough of the pieces to see the way that these storylines are interconnecting and to feel the tragedy of all of them together.
And I think something that I Love You does really well with its characters is that, even though Nessa is a character who, she's died, she's not even a part of the story anymore. Rand is technically a side character. He's not really a main character. But they're characters that we've grown really attached to. This is a story that we are so invested in, that we are so attached to all of these characters. So when we get this new information about Nessa and Rand, we get this new information about, like characters like Kousuke and Melissa and how they've all grown on us over time. And, like for a lot of us, we started the story, for Shanae or maybe Shanae and Noel. And it's the fact that it's really grown to be something where we care so passionately about all of these characters, like how like Solidaritea has like made Shinhei like that's her girl, like she's not sure what her deal is, but that is her problematic fave now. Like how we attach to them because um it's that way that kimchi makes them that product of their circumstances. She doesn't write them, she isn't creating conflict just to create it. It's like everything is a natural response or reaction to what has already happened. Also, Keaton mentioned the earlier symbolism about determination and Noel and the hope surviving. And that is like, as much as like, I think the idea of Nessa choosing not to go through with an abortion is very poignant because that whole thing about her being the one who chooses him, how, making that choice that I'm going to do this regardless. I can't help but kind of really be attached to the idea of it being something that failed, that, Noel wasn't supposed to exist, but he did regardless. It's like how I like to say I love things about like in spite how like I love Noel and Shanae and how they fall for each other in spite of everything else. That's how I feel very much about Noel, is that concept that like he wasn't supposed to exist. Rand wanted him to be terminated. Nana wished he had never been, conceived, and yet he persists. And how he is this character who has so much self-loathing, who feels himself that he isn't supposed to exist, that life would be better without him. And like I I don't want to make myself cry, but like the idea of there being a letter that Nessa had ever written Rand about how, the termination failed, for him to find out that A, he was supposed to be, but B, it didn't take, and how she's happy about it, like that would get to me, to find out that, you have always felt that you weren't supposed to exist, that you don't belong, that the world would be better without you. But despite it, you still made her life a better place. Even if she's gone now, even if he believes that she took her own life, the point is his existence, despite the choices they made, was, I think, I think he was that bundle of joy for her, I think he meant so much to her.
That like, yeah, that concept of like he came into this world that he wasn't supposed to be in, that he was chosen to not be in, that he wasn't supposed to exist in, and he still survived and endured and persevered and was loved. Or like he wasn't supposed to be here. They didn't want him to exist. The world still doesn't want him to exist, but he is still loved, and he was loved. And he will be loved.
Right. I was going to say that's the story we're seeing now, is that he has to learn to embrace the love that people are giving him because, even if he wasn't supposed to exist, he did. And his mother embraced that and she embraced him. And he needs to let the people who love him love him. I think that there is some deep symbology in or symbolism in like that concept of like you weren't supposed to exist. The world has tried so many times to thwart you, but despite it, you exist, you persist, you are that champion. Like, you know, it's that poeticism of the fact that he is somebody who is full of so much self-loathing, and how I think his ultimate story is definitely meant to be about coming to terms with his own existence and accepting that he is meant to be here. In fact, the world is, in fact, a better place because he's there. And you know, he's seen glimpses of it. That was so much a point of his birthday celebration with Shanae, Dita, and Soshi, is that he has made these people's lives better because he existed and because he reached out to them. Like, obviously, he has his own misgivings regarding Shanae because of how things have worked out with Yui, and he feels like, you know, that's part of that curse that he brings. But we also are seeing that, you know, like through Kousuke coming to realize that he has been victimized his entire life, and you know, Yui has always treated him very largely the same way that she treats Noel. I think that is going to be a big part in Noel being able to come around and embrace, you know, that he exists, that he is in fact meant to be here, and that even though you know, his birth was, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? We'll say difficult, I guess. His existence wasn't.
It's just like that, like, I feel like the reflection on this episode and like the Ressa flashback is so much that like what is, what was, what never could be, what will be, what can be, you know, where it's like it's just all of that like universe of possibility and hope and tragedy and loss and like grief and love, like all coming through in these moments. And like we're seeing all of those time points converging emotionally in this way.
I think that is the very satisfying thing about Salkyu being a parallel to Ressa, is that it is in some way the do-over, you know? Like we know, I think we know that it's not going to be perfect and that there's going to be hardships, and that it, you know, there's probably going to be anguish of their own. But I think something that we are seeing in those parallels is that, and you know, this is something that we talk about a lot anyway, is that, you know, Noel has he has the chances to make those different choices. And something you touched on, and I can't remember how much we talked about this versus how much of it was written, is like how Noel and Shanae have very different circumstances compared to Rand and Nessa. You know, for Rand and Nessa, those what ifs are a very different story because they're different characters. They had those different circumstances. Rand had a very different upbringing, which created very different values and, you know, ambitions compared to Noel and Shanae, where, you know, for Noel, it is very much for him that his ambition isn't so much to have a status, although we've seen that there's a little bit of that ambition there, but that seems to be more of a proving people wrong rather than, you know, like proving himself kind of thing. Where they're more in the position to choose love in the sense of, you know, strength and having that support system, acknowledging in each other that they are better together, where I don't think that was necessarily the case for Nessa and Rand. I don't think Rand could have seen that he was better together because he was so blinded by his ambitions.
It's
um
both
oh, go on.
one of the big parallels with them is that both of them were born feeling like they were nothing. And both of them had the ambition to want to become someone and to make a place in the world and feel like they were something. And it's the circumstances around them made the vision of what something is so very different, and the ability to become something and to choose what something is so very different through those support networks and those circumstances and the lives that they've lived up until now.
Right. Because, it could be very similar where, like, maybe Nessa did make Rand feel like someone, but maybe it wasn't enough. Where Noel, is in that place where she does make him feel like someone to such an extent that it terrifies him. It scares him because he knows what it means for him to care about people. And yeah, I think that's where we see that very big difference in their parallels. And I guess in that sense, where if Noel is Nana's do-over and Shanae is Kosuke's do-over, then Talkyu is our Ressa do-over.
No.
Where, like, it really feels like that, doesn't it? Where, like, it feels like that, where, like, Noel has every opportunity to make the choices that his father didn't, to, like, do you want to do to Shanae what your father did to your mother? And I think it's very, that's why I feel like it's so important that he sees himself in their shoes, that they realize that, those feelings aren't a passing thing. I don't know where we're going with them and feelings, because Kimchi has thrown all of my expectations out the window. But I also feel like with Noel going into jail, it gives us a really good opportunity for him to learn that his feelings aren't just a passing thing, for them to linger and grow as he's separated from her. I think sets him up for a good potential to foil his father. Hopefully, please be me proud, Noel. Please, I'm begging.
I think that is absolutely the route that we're going. And you've talked about it before, where, like, Ressa's story was a tragedy. That is their genre. Whereas, like, the story that we're currently reading has not actually been labeled a tragedy, been presented forefront as a tragedy. We have this theme of breaking generational cycles, which does involve going through similar processes and going through similar tragedy, but coming out of it at the end with that hope and that, new beginnings, new generations, new outcomes from those old cycles. And that theme again of, like, sunrises and sunsets, where, like, the sun has set on Rand and Nessa. Their story has ended, and it ended in such a tragic way. While Shanae and Noel are, they are that cycle, and we get the impression that as much as it won't be easy, and as much as sunrises and sunsets look so similar, the sun is rising on them and not setting.
It really is the beginning of their story for them. Like, something we also talk about a lot is how so little time has actually passed in terms of, like, from when this story began to now. Like, their story is just at the very beginning. Like, Noel may be trying to, cut ties, but we know that this is really just the beginning for them. And I think, right, like, this is their sunrise, and fingers crossed that we're not gonna see a sunset.
And in that same theme, it is time for the sun to set on this podcast episode.
Wow. Amazing.
Thank you. I will.
Incredible.
I welcome your your admiration. Now, yeah. Thanks for the tears, guys.
We love it when we all get together and cry together. That's what friendship is, right? It's when we all sit together and cry together.
I think it is.